I wanted to talk about some different kinds of bits today, particularly the Argentine snaffle and the tom thumb. Each of these bits has the same mouthpiece. It's a single jointed mouthpiece. It's often referred to as a snaffle mouth, which of course is not really what it's called, as a snaffle would refer to a bit without shanks whatsoever, something that has no curved chain and just direct action movement. But the snaffle mouth is a common name. You'll see it in lots of catalogs and magazines. So for the purpose of this, that's what I'll refer to it as. Although really when I say a snaffle mouth, I simply mean a single jointed mouthpiece such as this. Now the first bit I want to talk about is the tom thumb. This bit here is not really a tom thumb. As you can see, the shanks are pretty curved. And a real tom thumb has straight shanks and a few other minor design changes. But for the most part, this is very similar. So you can see the mouthpiece is fairly fat. It is not contoured. It's a pretty poor finish, and the central joint has a pretty thick part sticking out, which can press into the tongue of the horse. There is some play here, but there's not very much at all. It's very tight here at this junction. You get quite a bit of rotation here along the mouthpiece and cheek connection, though. So that simulates a tom thumb pretty well. And what I want you to notice particularly is what happens when I pull back on one of the reins here. Now, of course, these bits are not in the horse's mouth, so the action here that we're going to see is going to be slightly different than what would happen with the mouth when the tongue is pressing on the bit, possibly causing it to curve, things like that. Obviously, you won't see the action on the bars and palate and such, but hopefully it's at least give you an idea of the mechanics of the bit and how it works when the rein is pulled. And what I want you to notice here on this tom thumb look-alike is that when I pull back on one side, the entire bit moves. There really is not any rotation around the central joint whatsoever. Pulling back on one side puts pressure on the entire mouth of the horse, so you really can't get any direct reining action whatsoever. That's what makes this a very poor bit for communication. And even when you get some rotation around here, there's a considerable amount of movement that translates directly from one side to the other side, which makes it a very poor communication tool. It's very unclear in its cues. I'm going to switch that tom thumb out for an Argentine snaffle. What we have here is a much better contoured mouth. It's thinner, and it also gives room for the horse's tongue within here. You'll see that the central joint is also a whole lot smaller, which means there's a lot more movement around it, and it's far less likely to pinch. Also, here at the mouthpiece and cheek connection, you've got quite a bit of play here, which allows very subtle rein cues to be translated from your reins to the horse. And now watch here what happens when you pull back on one rein. Look at how much rotation you get with just the one side of the bit without touching the other side whatsoever. In fact, the other side only begins to move once you've actually attached it here with your bottom strap. If you look at that in a front view, look at how far the one side gets to rotate before the other side is attacked whatsoever. You get quite a bit of pull, so you can actually have quite a bit of direct reining with this bit. You can swivel it out, pull it up, and a lot of that does not affect the other side of the bit whatsoever. So you can act on just one side of the horse's mouth at once without confusing him, which gives much better cues. It's much clearer communication from rider to horse. Heard that once again with our tom thumb, and you'll see how little rotation it takes of one joint to then influence the other side. And that's again because the center joint is bulkier, it's finished a whole lot poorer, it's going to poke into your horse's tongue, and it just does not have the same amount of give that the other bit does. Now in terms of Argentine snaffles, there are some pretty poorly made models of them too that really are basically tom thumbs in their design. This here is a reinsman bit, and you can see it's very well made. Reinsman bits are a lot pricier. They're my favorite brand though. I think you really get what you pay for. If you're going to get a cheaper bit, I'd definitely make sure that you feel it in person first to make sure that it really is a well-made bit. No sharp edges to pinch or whatever. That you get a lot of lubrication, a lot of movement around all the joints. There's no rust or anything. So that if you're going to buy a bit online, I would definitely go with the name brand just to make sure that you're getting a good quality product that's not going to hurt your horse and that's going to give you the cues that you need very clearly. In terms of the palate pressure that people a lot of times talk about with these bits, I want you to notice that the bit really can't pinch into a sharp point unless the cheek pieces are brought closer together. So if you get there, you get a very sharp point. Any snaffle mouthpiece bit with a single joint is going to do that. But really that can only happen when the bit is squeezed together. So a lot of times you think, well, if you pull back on the reins, well, see, look at that sharp point. But if you're pulling back on the reins, and again, this isn't in a horse's mouth, so that makes it really difficult to simulate very well. But if you had the horse's head holding this bit apart so the cheek pieces couldn't smash together like this, the horse's mouth is wider apart, and you're pulling back. So right now I'm holding the reins the way I normally would at the normal distance apart they would be in my hands if I was riding a horse. And the bit's kind of pinching right now because it's not in a horse's mouth, so it's wanting to slide into a point. Again, if it was in a horse's mouth, it would not be wanting to point like that. It'd be laying a lot flatter, unless he had a really mouthy tongue or something that was really messing with it. But if I pull back on one rein, and again, I'm sorry the bit's collapsing, it wouldn't do that in a horse's mouth to nearly that degree. But you can see how I can easily pick up one without influencing the other. And also how the bit is not really collapsing anymore than it should when I pull back. It stays the same degree apart when I pull back on both reins. It's not just going to scissor in half like this. You have to, it takes special talent to get it to collapse, because when you're normally pulling back, you're pulling back slightly outward from the shank location of the bits. I'm not explaining this very well, but as long as your hands are farther apart than the shanks of the bit, which they will be in most cases, you will not be causing the bit to collapse into a sharp point unless the horse's tongue is pressing outwards on the bit. And I apologize that I can't have a very clear illustration of that with this very imperfect visual apparatus. That's faulty design, I guess. Now to talk once again about mouthpieces. To contrast with the snaffle mouth we were looking at before, like with this little bit, the single jointed bit, let's look at one 3-piece bit just to see how much more degree of freedom in terms of independent side action you can get on this bit. In the Western world, this would be called a dog bone. The English, this isn't really a French slake or a Dr. Bristol. It's kind of halfway in between each. Cut the little rollers on it, which is just for feel. Little copper rollers, some horses like that in their tongues. But watch when you pull on one side of this bit, it can just move all the way up without affecting the other side. So in some ways, it is preferable than a snaffle single jointed bit in terms of that motion that you get there. Some horses like having a 3-piece mouth. They can play with it more. It conforms a lot more to the mouth. You can see there's absolutely no way this can pinch the tongue unless these joints are really poorly made. That gets back to bit quality. So many horses will prefer this mouthpiece. Some actually work great in a snaffle mouth though. And if they like it better, there's no reason to change. Like I said, with an Argentine snaffle, you can still get a fair degree of independent side action, not nearly as much as a bit like this. Again, this is a much greater degree, but keep in mind that these shanks aren't fixed as the Argentine snaffles were earlier. So that may be a bit misleading, because that was pulling itself up by the string at the bottom. But again, a lot of motion there. In the end, it all depends on what works best for you and your horse. Consult a trainer if you have any further questions. It's always the best place to start anyway. I think that's it for now. Thanks for watching.